I have to apologize for my lack of voice. It's good to be back. The Hagim have ended, and it's time to get back to our learning. And we are learning about the life of Josephus. And I won't recap everything. You can see it on KosherTube, but I'll tell you where we left off. Josephus is in the Galilee, and he's struggling between two forces, those loyal to the Romans and the Zealots, which he sometimes refers to as the robbers. Sometimes he refers to them as those from Gamla. He finds himself in between both. We understand from his writing that he is portraying himself as somebody who is a Jewish nationalist, but deep inside he believes that the Jewish forces cannot defeat the Romans, and he's really just trying to delay the Jewish forces from taking up arms because he feels that they will be butchered if they do. Now, what his motives are very unclear, because we've seen a lot of inconsistencies, and we will continue to see it. We don't know at what point. We know at the end of the story he has clearly thrown his lot in with the Roman conquerors, although he sees himself still as a defender of the Jews, Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, all the gifts that the Jews have given to the world. But he lives out his life in Rome. The question, which is unclear, is at what point did he make this commitment? Was it when he was a very young man before he went to the Galilee? Was he already a double agent? Was it after he was arrested and freed by the Romans? It's a little bit unclear when it happened. Maybe it's for you to judge as we go forward. Where we left him was he had a struggle with the Zealots in a city called, hold on for 1 second, please, Terapia. And the Zealots had outnumbered him quite a bit, and they were coming into the city. He prevented them from getting past the gates, but said they could send a representative to him. And they sent their strongest warrior to him, and they found him in his home, Josephus in his home, there. And he and some of his few cohorts that he had held him and cut off his hand and tied it around his neck and sent him back to his troops on the other side of the gates. And, well, you could imagine, they fled. And this was a victory for Josephus, even though he was significantly outnumbered, which we see part of the consistency of all his stories. He's always the underdog, and he's always so brilliant that he succeeds. He's also the author of all these stories. We should keep that in mind. So, we'll move on now to what happens after that experience, right? It says, but as for the inhabitants of the city of Tiberias, they wrote to the king, who was a subject of the Romans, and desired him to send forces sufficient to be a guard to their country. For that they were desirous to come to him. So the people of Tiberias, right, had made a decision not to throw in their lots with the Zealots or with somebody in the middle ground, which is how Josephus described himself, but really to a puppet of the Romans. Right? They're saying, we're not going to fight. We want to be with you. Right? This was what they wrote to the king, for they were desirous to come to him. Right? But when I came to them, they desired me to build their walls, as I had promised them to do, for they had heard that the walls of Terapia were already built. I agreed to their proposal accordingly, and when I prepared to build, I ordered the architects to go to work. But on the third day, when I was gone back to Terapia, which was 30 furlongs distant from Tiberias. 30 furlongs is... furlong is 200 meters. 30 furlongs would be... let's see...
Very close.
About 4 miles. It's about 4 miles away. So he had gone back to Syria, which is 30 furlongs distant from Tiberias. It turned out that some Roman horsemen were discovered on their march not far from the city, which made it to be supposed that the forces had come from the king. Upon which they shouted and lifted up their voices in commendations of the king and in reproaches against me. So now he's actually telling us a story that he hasn't witnessed, right? Because he's in Tiberias. Mm-hmm. So as we're listening,
he's in
he's in Terapia, right? So as we're listening to his story, always remember that not only is he subjective about his own behavior, but how much more so when he's writing about something he didn't personally witness. But one of them came running to me and told me their dispositions were that they had resolved to revolt against me. Upon hearing that news, I was very much alarmed, for I had already sent away my armed men from Terapia to their own homes, because the next day was Shabbos, the Sabbath. For I would not have the people of Terapia disturbed on that day by a multitude of soldiers. And indeed, whenever I stayed in that city, I never took any particular care for a guard about my own body, because I had had frequent instances of the faithfulness of its inhabitants bore to me. So this is a very important issue, right? Is that Josephus is saying that, and be careful at this point what he's saying. He's saying, I sent my soldiers home. At first you think it's about Shabbos, that the soldiers will be home for Shabbos. But he's saying, I didn't want the soldiers to be disturbing the Shabbos of the civilians in the city. So I sent them home. Right? And now I'm without soldiers. The Romans are riding to Tiberias, and the people of Tiberias have welcomed them and have rebelled against me. Yes.
He is speaking on behalf of the Jerusalem
leadership, not Agrippa, not the Roman king or the Jewish king appointed by Rome. Right? He's speaking on the religious leadership of Jerusalem, right? Which is making its own decisions. They know that the whole country is caught between those who want to rebel against the king in Rome and those who want to find some way to coexist under Roman domination. Right? I don't want to review all of it because we've talked about it before. Right?
Yeah, because
it sound familiar?
It's shades, different shades of the.
Yeah, you know, how important are the most powerful people in the world to us in Israel? Right? That's really the question. They want to dominate us, right? They want to dominate us without having to fight a war. Right? There are some of us who, at the drop of a hat, want to go to war with them. And there's some of us who say, let's find a way to make peace. We have benefits from peace. Right?
So familiar.
What?
So familiar.
Sounds very familiar. Okay, so the issue of Shabbos has now come up for Josephus. So it's clear he views himself as a person who guards the Shabbos, who keeps the Shabbos. and he appreciates that the people of Terapia also do, right? And Tiberias also do. Right? And as we said, he never really was very worried about the people of Tiberias because most of them had always shown respect to him.
No, Terapia.
No, we're now talking
Tiberius
about
as well.
Tiberias. Right? This is about Tiberius. He was in Terapia, right? But he heard that he had to return to Tiberias. Okay. I now had about me no more than 7 armed men, besides some friends, and was doubtful of what to do. To send to recall my own forces, I did not think it proper, because the day was almost over, and had those forces been with me, I could not take up arms on the next day, because our laws forbade us to do so, even though our necessity would be very great. So, he's making a very interesting statement. He says that it's against Jewish laws to go to war on Shabbos.
We just don't think this self-defense.
So, there was a belief it's against halacha, against Jewish law, Jewish law, to go to war on Shabbos. This is what Josephus is saying. Let's look at it again, right? I could not take up arms the next day because our laws forbade us to do so, even though our necessity should be very great. That's what he's saying. Today is Friday. Shabbos is coming in. The Romans are arriving in Tiberias. I have 7 people with me who are armed. And in fact, even if I had more, I can't do anything about it because it's Shabbos. I can't fight a war. Right? So let's look at let's look at a little bit more about this.
Take another sip.
This is from Miodea. Right. It's a website. Right. It says, in the book of Maccabees, this is a question being asked, in the book of Maccabees, it mentions that early in the struggle, there was a group of Jews hiding in caves. The Greeks found them and were going to attack them on Shabbos. The Jewish people in the caves said they could not desecrate Shabbos no matter what. They all got killed. In response, Yehuda Maccabee made a proclamation that it is required that you can fight on Shabbos so that they do not get killed in this manner.
You can.
You can. Now this is more than 100, 150 years before Josephus, right? So there was a tradition that we don't fight. The Greeks slaughtered us because we wouldn't fight, right? And Yehuda Maccabee took a position, no. In such a situation, not only can you, but you must fight.
I don't understand how it started. Saving life always
you save life.
What?
You save life if you're not.
If you make
maybe they believe that there would be a miracle that would save them. I'm not sure.
But you're allowed to make a soup to a sick person.
Nobody was sick.
Cut the...
Yeah,
but life is danger.
Maybe they believed they wouldn't be killed if they kept Shabbos.
But person would die.
Yeah, I can't give you the reasoning, Yelena.
Okay.
But the tradition obviously was, until Yehuda Maccabee made the declaration, that we don't go to war on Shabbos.
But it's couldn't be Tzduki approach.
This is before the Tzduki.
Okay.
Right. Yehuda Maccabee. This is a different war. Right. This is the war through which the Levium, right, the Hashmonaim, became the kings.
Kohanim.
Centuries later, in the books of Josephus, Josephus mentions the Romans were building siege engines, and the Jews would throw down stones to stop the construction. You have to build a siege engine very close to the walls. Siege engine. You have to build a siege engine very close to the walls of a city, because the siege engine itself has a number of capabilities. One is it's to climb over the walls of the city. It's a tower. Another is that it can have a ramming rod on it that rams into the walls of the city and breaks it down. Another one is that it has catapults that throws catapults into the city, or flaming oil into the city. So you don't want to build a siege engine 50 meters away. It has to be very close to the walls, right? So it says Josephus mentions that the building siege engines, and the Jews would throw down stones to stop the construction. This foiled the Romans until they started building the siege engines on Shabbos. And notice that no stones came down on them. By the way, this is a little bit suspect, you understand? Josephus is writing something. He was outside with the Romans.
Maybe he mentioned.
Eventually, the Romans only built siege engines on Shabbos, and the people in Yerushalayim got sacked and killed, and all sorts of bad things happened. We know the story. This was years before the destruction of the temple, though. Again, a proclamation is made that the Jews are allowed to fight the Romans on Shabbos. Again, later in the Gemara, before talking about Hanukkah, ironically enough, this is back to Maccabees, it stated that you may not siege a city 3 days before Shabbos. Right, this is if you're attacking. Right. Shammai, however,
not Jewish?
What? It doesn't say. Shammai, however, states, based on the Pasuk, until it is conquered, that you may siege a city even on Shabbos until the city is completely taken, based on that verse in Chumash. So this is about attacking a non-Jewish city, but it's about whether the Jewish army can continue the attack during Shabbos. Does anyone know what's going on in here? Why did the people think they couldn't fight on Shabbos? Why 300 years later did they think so again? Why in the Gemara do they also make the assumption that until Shammai says it's okay? Right? Also, why today is it so universally agreed upon that you can break Shabbos when serving the army, even not in wartime, if ordered or required to do so in the army? Right? Now, this is a little bit misleading. This is a little misleading because obviously the Yom Kippur War, but also the fact of the matter is that Israel has been in a state of war since its founding. So what they're talking about is an active war in which there are massive armies struggling against one another. But Israel's army is, do I need to even say it in the world we live in today? Israel's army is a working army from its birth until today.
But actually it's even said there is a permission to carry phone on Shabbos, last Shabbos.
Yeah.
And pepper spray.
Right. Pekuch nefesh, to save a life.
But nothing happened yet. But for yourself,
you can look around you and see you're in a very dangerous environment. A decision can be made.
Yeah, but you have a phone in order to say if you feel uncomfortable without a phone. It's very interesting.
It's not about discomfort. It's about a very good reason for discomfort.
Yeah. And
the ability to push one button and summon help. Right? That's what a phone is. It's an alarm button for people in Israel. Push one button and an alarm goes out to people. Okay, let's continue. So this is a dispute, but we can see where Josephus comes down. He comes down on the fact that if you're going to go and defend a city, and it means doing it on Shabbos, it's not something he feels comfortable with. Right? I could not take up arms on the next day because our laws forbade it to do so, even though our necessity should be very great. And if I should permit the people of Terapia and the strangers with them to guard the city, I saw that they would not be sufficient to that purpose, and I perceived that I should be obliged to delay my assistance a great while. For I thought that the forces that came from the king would prevail against me, and I should be driven out of the city. I considered, therefore, how to get clear of these forces by a stratagem. So I immediately placed those, my friends of Terapia, on whom I could best confide at the gates, to watch those very carefully who went out of those gates. I also called to me the heads of the families and directed every one of them to seize upon a ship. Right? So every member of the families, every head of a family, should take one ship. They should go on board it, take a pilot with them, and follow him to the city of Tiberias. I also myself went on board one of those ships with my friends and the 7 armed men already mentioned, and sailed for Tiberias. Okay, can anybody imagine what's going to happen next? Anybody have any ideas?
They're attacking Tiberius now from Terapia.
With 7 men?
And this with inhabitants of, I don't know.
Okay. But now, when the people of Tiberias perceived that there were no forces come from the king, and yet saw the whole lake full of ships, they were in fear of what would become of their city, and they were greatly terrified, as supposing that the ships were full of men on board. So they then changed their minds, and they threw down their weapons and met me with their wives and children, and made acclamations to me with great commendations, for they imagined that I did not know their former inclinations to have rebelled against me. So they persuaded me to spare the city. But when I had come near enough, I gave the order to the masters of the ships to cast anchor a good way off land.
Just in case.
And the people of Tiberias might not perceive that the ships were empty, that they had no men on board. But I went nearer to the people in one of the ships. I rebuked them for their folly, and that they were so fickle as, without any just occasion in the world, to revolt from their faithfulness to me. However, I assured them that I would entirely forgive them for the time to come, if they would send 10 of the ringleaders of the multitude to me. And when they complied readily with this proposal, and sent me the men before mentioned, I put them on board a ship, and sent them away to Terapia, and ordered them to be kept in prison. So far it's just clever. So far it's just clever.
Yeah, good he didn't kill them and cut their hands and put it at their necks.
Wait.
Oh, it's not done yet?
And by this stratagem it was that I gradually got all the Senate of Tiberias into my power, and sent them to the city before mentioned, Terapia, with many of the principal men among the populace, and those not fewer in number than the other. But when the multitude saw into what great miseries they had brought upon themselves, they desired me to punish the author of this rebellion. His name was Cletus, a young man, bold and rash in his undertakings. Now, since I thought it not agreeable to piety to put one of my own people to death, and yet found it necessary to punish him, I ordered Levi, one of my own guards, to go to him and cut off one of Cletus's hands.
Lovely.
But as he was ordered to do this, was afraid to go out of the ship alone among the great multitude, I was not willing that the apprehensiveness of my soldier should appear to the people of Tiberias. If he looks scared, my whole bluff is finished. Okay, so now, anybody want to guess what's going to happen next?
They asked him to come on a ship.
So I called Cletus himself and said to him, "Since you deserve to lose both your hands for your ingratitude to me, be you your own executioner.
He asked him to cut his own hand.
Lest, if you refuse so to be, you undergo a worse punishment." And when he earnestly begged me to spare one of his hands, it was with difficulty that I granted it. So, in order to prevent the loss of both his hands, he willingly took his sword and cut off his own left hand, and this put an end to the rebellion. Now, the men of Tiberias, after I was gone to Terapia, perceived that the stratagem I had used against them, and they admired how I had put an end to the foolish rebellion without shedding of blood. But now, when I had sent for some of those multitude of the people of Tiberias out of prison, among them were Justus and Pistus, I made them to dine with me. I guess they had their hands still. No, somebody was feeding them. And during our supper, during supper time, I said to them that I knew the power of the Romans was superior to all others, but did not say so publicly because of the robbers, the zealot. He's confiding in them, look, I understand. I'm not a zealot. I understand why you wanted the king, why you wanted the Romans. I know we can't defeat the Romans. But it's not a good thing to talk about right now. Because if you do, the zealots will come and kill you. And me. So it's better. I knew the power of the Romans was superior to all others, but did not say so publicly because of the robbers. So I advised them to do as I did, and to wait for a proper opportunity, and not to be uneasy at my being their commander, for that they could not expect to have another who would use the like moderation that I had done.
Wow. I think your answer is right here.
What is my answer?
The question you ask, when he decided, when he was already on the Roman side.
Well, he's not saying that. He's saying that, and I think this is a position that he takes. There's a difference between actively helping the Romans. For instance, giving them information about your own troops. Right.
Zealots. When he calls zealots robbers, he will easily, by using this wording, he easily can let them be slaughtered by Romans.
Right. So the question is, right, the question is, if you're using, today, there's a chaos in Syria, right? Al-Nusra is working with the ISIL.
Against ISIL.
Working with ISIL. Working with ISIL against Hezbollah and Iran, who are supporting Assad, right? Who has support from Putin, who has troops on the ground from the Iranians, fighting the ISIL forces as well as the democratic resistance. So, in that situation, what is the best strategy, say, for Israel's defense forces? Who should they be helping right now?
Everybody should be killing.
So
should step aside and let them be successful.
That's very different, right? That's very different kind of explaining, okay, the Romans, may attack our people who are going to cause us to be destroyed by the Romans, as opposed to giving the Romans information, specifically, and acting as a double agent. There's a big difference, right? He's saying, I'm concerned, right? Not that I want Roman domination, but if we fight Rome, right, we will be destroyed completely. So we need to find a way to manage the relationship with Rome so that they don't destroy us, right? And yet keep as much of our own autonomy in our ways as we can. Right? So I'm not giving in to the Roman idea. I'm trying to manipulate Rome. I think that if we fight them directly, there'll be a lot of Jews who will die, right? And it'll be a disaster. In the end, by the way, he seems to be wiser about this than Rabbi Akiva was. You know, in fact, later on, is that he believed that they couldn't win. Now, I think for a lot of different reasons, they could have won. Personal belief on it. Because they weren't fighting alone. There were a lot of people around the world, including in Rome, that were sympathetic to their view. If we look at historical. Separate conversation. Why they lost. Right. Certainly this part of the battle they had no chance because of the divisions of their own forces.
The question
the Jewish forces.
If soldiers were sympathizers of the Roman soldiers, if they sympathize
his soldiers.
Jews, yeah. No, the Roman soldiers, because you just said that in Rome.
I mean, it's in
Rome, it's in Rome, but
right.
what about soldiers?
I don't think there's any evidence that I know of that Roman soldiers rebelled or betrayed Rome. It was more in Rome itself and
So
in
it's
other
not the
provinces
Roman
of Rome.
citizens they're fighting.
What?
It's the Roman soldiers fighting. And he saw that to go against the Roman army, there's no...
No, but
I don't think they would win.
there were uprisings going on.
They probably would take
At the
longer,
time.
but in the end they will die.
No, it was two factors. Roman soldiers are controlled by Rome,
Yes.
right? And what was going on throughout the empire, where there were monotheistic rebellions going on, and within Rome, many of the senators and virtually all of their wives, not all, but majority of their wives, right, were sympathetic to monotheistic belief. Right? And the question was the Pax Romanus, the peace of Rome, that Rome had created through power, falling apart? And was it being replaced by the dignity of man, as understood by a man being made in the image of God? Right? You know, the idea of inalienable rights that are inscribed in the Declaration of Independence of the United States is a reference to the fact that rights don't come from the monarch. Rights come from God, and the monarch itself has to manage the country, but he doesn't bestow the rights on people. It comes from a greater force. This was a unique concept that was Jewish. You know, that the king of Israel, we've talked about this before, in all other countries the king makes the laws. In Israel, God made the laws for kings before there were any kings. And the king had to follow those laws. He wasn't above the laws. So the question of whether the rebellion itself could have succeeded is unclear, but it did not succeed. We know that. And clearly Josephus believes that at this point. He says he does. This is early on. We'll continue next week and see where he goes next. It will be interesting.
Mm-hmm.